Hey guys, my name is Philip and this is part 2 of the sawhorse build video. So this video is going to be focused on milling out the parts. As you can see, I have my parts here and they've sat overnight, let them do their thing, and now we're going to move on to milling. So be sure, if you're just jumping in on this video, make sure you go and look at part 1 of the sawhorse build, where we basically went through selecting out parts and doing the initial rough out. Part 3 will be moving on to the layout for the joinery and so on. So let's get into it. So now I'm ready to go ahead and start doing the milling. So anytime you're doing any mill work, the first step is always going to be the joiner. So I'm just going to kind of tell you real quick a couple of pointers that you need to make sure you check before you start this. Obviously, the first thing, and maybe not obviously, but always check the grain direction. And what I mean by that is I'm always going to look at the side grain here and see how the grain's coming up out of this board. For a joiner, you ideally want the grain to go up and out, so when the knives hit it, it's going with it instead of it going down to where it's going to hit it, grab that grain, and you get tear out. A lot of people are not aware they're getting tear out, but what they do notice is their board has a lot of pieces missing and it just doesn't look very clean. Also, the way I like to mill lumber will be I address one face first, then that face goes down for the planer, and I basically make the top face parallel to this, and then I go back to the joiner and deal with an edge. The reason I do that is for option, and it's to do with grain direction too. I don't want to be married to one face having to go up against this fence. So I'm not going to get too much into that. I'm going to get going and mill this. We do have a video called Milling 101, so please check that out, and we kind of go into how to set the joiner, what to look for, a little bit of troubleshooting. So let's get started with this milling. Okay, so now that I've face joined all my parts, and like I mentioned before I started doing that, I made sure the grain direction was going the correct way. So that really helps me. To do that initially saves me time, because from the joiner to the planer, I don't have to think which way it needs to go for the planer. In my situation, the part goes through the joiner, and it just flips around, and now it's going to go for the planer, and that's going to put that grain going down since the planer blade's on the top. Just little things like that can save you a lot of time, definitely if you've got a lot of parts. Less you have to think about it, better. All right, so all this stuff's pretty consistent. It's about 1 inch and 1/8 inch. I've got to go down to 1 inch. I'm just going to use a little indicator that's on this DeWalt until it just starts moving it, and I should be good to go. Now, I know that some of these parts have to be a little heavier than others, so what I'll do is I'll get it all milled to the thickest measurement, and then I will separate those parts out and continue milling on the other parts. Anytime I mill something, even if it's an 1/8 inch I need to take off, I'm going to go ahead. As soon as this face cleans up, I'm going to keep rotating it back and forth, and what that does is it doesn't take too much material of one face, which can end up making the board wanting to move because you're removing too much material. So flip it back and forth, it's going to keep a much flatter board. So as I'm milling this material, the first thing I'm going to do is once it goes through and it starts cleaning up, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take a measurement, and it's right at 1 1/16. And I know for my planer, and this is any tool that you have in your shop, you're going to get to know it very well. It's a 30-second, it's a 1/16 per turn. I usually do it in half-turn increments, so 30-second a time. So I can just basically, I don't have to measure this again. I know I want 1 inch, I just do the math, and I rely on this machine, and I know time after time it works perfectly. So that saves me from having to keep measuring back and forth. Another thing to point out with this particular DeWalt, one reason I really love this machine is it has two feed rates. So at the initial milling, I've got it at the faster machine feed rate. Once I get closer to final measurement, I'll slow that down, and that way I'll get a much better cut on the surface. Also, one more pointer, I can be pretty particular about this, and it does matter in certain cases. I'm chasing, if you notice, when I'm putting these boards through, I'm bumping it one after the other. I try to slowly work my way across, but when it comes to the final measurement, they all go to the same side consistently. And that's because throughout this 12 inches, it can be a few thousandths different from side to side. In most cases, that's not going to matter, but it's just a good habit to get into. So, you know, real thing is just to get to know your machines. So I've got everything down to final thickness. As you can see, I've separated the groups. Pretty simple little project. There's two group selections. We've got the 1 inch and the 7/8. So now that these guys have all been done, you know, joined and planed to final thickness, like I said before, I'm now not married to the one face that has to go up against the joiner. This way it gives me more options. If I want to flip it around, do whatever I want, I can. And that's all got to do with reading the grain direction and getting a better cut. So I'm going to go ahead, real quick, check if this is 90. And it is. It looks good. I'm going to go and I'm going to basically address one edge, making sure I get it 90 to a face, and then it goes back through the planer. Okay, so now I've got my 90-degree edge. So basically we have two faces that are perfect and we have our 90. So now there's two ways to get that third edge, this rough edge. You could take it to the table saw and basically just run it through, clean that edge up, or go for the planer. Now I prefer the planer, and the simple reason is I'm looking for a milled surface just like the rest of this and not a table saw blade surface. Okay, so now that I have all my parts final milled, so to final width and thickness, the next step is to use my sled and basically take them to length. Make sure it's square and setting up any stops that I need to do. So I'm gonna always trim an edge first and then have my stop set out here. So trim it, gently go to the stop, cut it, do you know, the 4 legs, and then change the stop, and you know, just continue doing so. Always be prepared. Let's see. So just real quick pointer, this is pretty basic, but anytime I do it, I'll trim an end and I'm gonna put it up on edge like this. Obviously the saw's off. I'm gonna measure and I'm gonna put a little tick on the very bottom corner. That way, it's real easy to just line it up to the blade curve that's pointing towards this side to the right. And then if I like it, I set my stop to it and I'm good to go. Okay, so I've got all my parts to final length. So now it's on to doing the layout. So this has been part 2 of the sawhorse build. Part 1, selecting out the parts, roughing out. Part 2, final milling, cutting to final length. And then part 3 is going to be the layout. So that's what's coming up next, basically getting into the joinery. Make sure you check out all of the videos in order. It'll make more sense that way. And please, hit that like, share, subscribe, and basically spread the word. Hope you enjoy. Cheers.